All right, guys. Hello. My name is Kimi Katiti, and I am recording on my webcam today. I'm not going to be editing this, so this might be a little bit long, but I just wanted to talk about the new podcast with Tim Ross and Jackie Hill Perry. Um, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about. First things first, if Jackie or Tim, if you are seeing this, this is all in love, and it isn't really a critique, it's more just add-ons to thoughts. Yes, there's going to be a little bit of pushback on what CRT is, what it isn't, what the push against it is, what it isn't, how people are co-opting that to lump in book bannings, but I'll get into all of that. Tim or Jackie, if you are watching, I highly recommend, please watch through to the end. Put it on 1.75 playback if you must. But I really do hope you hear my heart. This is not just just critiquing just for the sake of being angry and mad. I really think I have some enlightening things to share, especially with someone from roots in Rwanda on my mom's side. I think the life experience there, the connection to that country, and the fact that it was brought up in this conversation might aid some some of this debate that we have around CRT in our nation right now. I think it is very important. It was very heavy on my heart to just share this. Not saying that, oh, the Lord told me to say this. I don't really engage in that kind of like spiritual talk, but I did wake up this morning with just this heavy burden to like share some of these thoughts. So thank you for listening. Anyone else who is listening to this, I thank you so much. Just hang in there. We're gonna make kind of a circuit of ideas, but do hang on through the end, even though this might be a lot of words and talking. So I just wanted to talk about the great thing about this podcast. It is so healthy and it is so spirit filled. So I'm not gonna necessarily clip in any video clips from the podcast or read any dialogue or audio, like read any transcripts from it, because I really want you to check out the full 2 hour, 2.5 hour podcast in your own time. I say that because I think the context of the entire conversation is important in order to understand what they were talking about at that point and also understand all of the other great things that they were mentioning. Also, speaking of which, today is my first day of that secular music cleanse, so I'm really excited for what fruit that is going to produce in my life. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, do check out the podcast. A lot of great things were said, but I want to briefly recap and just zero in on the point where they talked about CRT and where Jackie brought up Rwanda. It was very brief, but some things were shared, and I think it helps to sort of bring that dialogue out more, especially from an African's perspective, an African who has had family members actually perish in that genocide. Family members, friends on my mom's side. Again, this happened when I was very young, so these wouldn't be people that I know, but we were very close to that event as well. So let me just recap on a lot of the good things that they said. So Tim and Jackie, during the length of this podcast and somewhere slightly before the halfway mark, or maybe like about a quarter in, to be honest, I'm not sure. They started talking about the debate with CRT, critical race theory, if I haven't mentioned that fully yet, and how people are trying to hide the history of America. Now, I have made very many videos on CRT and race identity. A lot of those have just been stream of consciousness. There's not been a lot more to it. And I'm not claiming to be some sort of intellectual with a depth of knowledge on CRT. But what I will acknowledge is that there are people, and I've heard this about certain states like maybe Texas and Florida, there are movements to ban books and to ban certain topics from being discussed in the classroom. Now, that in and of itself might fall under the umbrella of our discussion of race in America, But I think it's unfair to lump in those efforts with people who are generally critiquing the lens. Because I think there are other conservatives, Republicans who are just, in their own mind, in their own ambition, are tired of talking about race and racism, which I don't think is good. I think we should definitely have these discussions, talk about the history. In fact, my solutions from like 2 years ago were to add more history, to talk about more history, so that we do not need the lens to tell us what black people are set up for in this country, what white people are set up for in this country. We have the history to show that these classifications of race are foolishness. So anyway, I'm going to get to that to the end as well. So I do believe that there are conservatives, there are Republicans who just co-opt this discomfort with, especially during 2020, there was this blanket of racial division and tension that was so thick. There were a lot of curricula popping up, programs popping up that had this very, it's very almost neo-segregative feel to it. And I think some Republicans have always been waiting for the chance. And I hate to just lump in the term Republicans because it could be anyone really. It could just be anyone really who is just maybe just tired of talking about race. I know Christopher Rufo said anytime we can take away this conversation of racism altogether, like that's his mission, is to stop talking about racism, period. And that's not what I'm about. That's not what I want to deliver. I more so want to help to contribute to the healing of racial division, racial tension. I think forgiveness plays a key role in that. Again, I'll talk about that a little closer to the end. But yes, there are people who co-opt this and try to use some discomfort in order to just put their agenda into things and ban things and say, you know what, we don't ever want to talk about slavery, we don't want to talk about this. I've heard some people say like they never really learned about slavery in American history. So I don't want to negate those experiences, but again, that's not really what is at the heart of, at least people that I have listened to, that's not at the heart of what they're pushing back against. And I think even using the term CRT is a little bit, in hindsight, I would say it's a little bit misleading in its use because it is, again, it both is accurate, but it also is not quite what people are having discomfort with. I think it's more so the critical social justice movement that is springing forth out of critical race theory paperwork and research. Okay, I'm not unaware of the book Critical Race Theory and Introduction, and I highly recommend. Again, I think I've linked it in some of my videos in the description below. There's access to a free PDF. That critical race theory, that is not American history. So in the podcast, I think Tim makes this equation that CRT is banning American history and the story of slavery. That isn't what is happening at all. Critical race theory is more so finding disparity between different groups in everyday life, in everyday situations, especially when it comes to like the legal system, the justice system, where there is unfairness, there is disparity shown to people of color. There's also where you talk about intersectionality and how different facets of marginalization intersect with one another and how certain groups are more oppressed because of those intersections. That's more so what people are critiquing these days when they talk about CRT. Now it's a different term. I know conservatives have sort of overused the term woke and CRT, and now it just, for some states, means not talking about racism altogether. And I acknowledge that. I definitely acknowledge that. However, in and of itself, even people who are proponents of CRT, unless they are lying to you, they will tell you it is not necessarily history. It's meant to sort of be a sifting through of the different imbalances where racism is present almost in disguise, but it is causing a disparity between groups because of biases and other factors. One study, for example, in the book Critical Race Theory and Introduction is how car dealers will, or car salespeople will sell off cars at higher rates to people of color, to black women, than to white men. So I think there are a lot of important things to see in those critical race theory documents, But then there is this push to bring that lens into young minds, into the classroom. And some people don't want that set up for their children, where they are told in this country you're not able to get these opportunities because you are black. I believe, especially as a believer, that that sort of literally puts this white supremacist weight on you, where you actually, you don't see that as an empowering fact, you see that as a disempowering truth, that whatever you do, you're always going to have this white privilege, this systemic racism working against you. And some people feel like we should just give everyone the chance of having a blank slate, rather than feed young minds this presupposition. Actually, that word presupposition is something Jackie mentioned oftentimes when she would talk about going into the Bible and having the presupposition of good, that God is a good God. What a lot of people hear when they're talking about CRT, they don't want children to have this presupposition that the world is set up for bad. I think that is a very fitting word in this instance, especially for young black kids. My heart, and the reason I am so passionate about talking about this, is not only did I experience the like mental disintegration, the anxiety, the depression, the disempowerment that came with taking on a CRT lens. Like I grieve for the years that I lost. I grieve in a sense for the relationships I cut off. I grieve for how withdrawn I became because of over analyzing microaggressions and over analyzing different interactions through the lens of racism. But also, I grieve for younger minds who will spend a lot of years looking at life through this victimhood lens. Again, that word gets used so many times, but I really do believe the more we sort of drill this lens in, not the history, but the lens, we're setting people up for almost an unmovable weight of the mental shackles of white supremacy, to think white people will always have it better than me, white people will always be ahead of me. My heart just breaks for that sort of mentality, and that's why I, for one, criticize a lot of these identities that we put on. So yeah, so I say that to acknowledge that yes, there are people who co-opt that discomfort to just say, you know what, let's not talk about race or American history altogether. There's this effort to ban books, which I'm fully against. I made a video about that with my friend Brittany King. Check out her YouTube channel as well if you have the time. But I think we should just allow different ideas to exist, but we can also counteract those ideas with different opinions. So I'm very much against that book banning, and in fact definitely support teaching American history, in fact teaching world history of racism, to show that this wasn't just an American thing, that it was also like teaching South African history. Like there is so much that you can learn from that. And sorry about the sirens in the background if you can hear that, but there is so much that we can learn from that, and I'm all for putting that forward, like more knowledge, more history, because then you can just see how ridiculous it is with your own mind. You can make that judgment. You don't have to have someone telling you, because you are black, A, B, C, D will happen to you. It's almost like people are like declaring your future for you, and to me, there's just something spiritually rotten about that. Um, and just something in my spirit will not say, you know what, that's fine. You can go ahead and do that. I will respect different degrees of people seeing the usefulness of CRT. Like I totally think, like my friend Will Roos says, there is a place for it to be used. But in terms of the people in the critical social justice movement, which springs forth from CRT, who just make that everyday life, everyday living on social media. You're critiquing certain words, you're banning certain words, you're teaching people that anytime you feel harm, like that is valid, and you should feel the weight of that, and you should punish whoever has cast that pain on you. I think that's setting us off into a bad place. So I also want to talk about the fact that Jackie said that she went to Rwanda, and I want to talk about something very important where I agree as well. Um, so Jackie Hill Perry, in this podcast interview, said that she had the opportunity to visit Rwanda about 2 years ago, I think, is what she said. And she said that while she was there, she had these encounters with a lot of Rwandan people. Even the fact that we say Rwandan, I will talk about at the end, and not Rwandese. We say Rwandan. So she saw a lot of Rwandan people, and they were there was this like this weight of like the fact that almost everyone here has a relative that has passed away from the genocide is kind of haunting, right? But she said they have healed and they have transformed. But this is the conclusion that she put to it. They have healed and they have transformed because they get to talk about the history and remember the history of Rwanda. And basically, Jackie made the conclusion that in America, if we're allowed to just talk about the history, then we would heal much like the Rwandans. So, in a way, I agree with this, but I also disagree with this a little bit because it's going to come back to it. It's going to come back to the fact of why people are pushing back against CRT. So, yes, I agree we should talk about the history. The only reason I disagree with that is because that isn't the same thing as a CRT pushback. Like I said earlier, CRT pushback isn't against, for some, most people actually, I don't want to say some, most people, it's not about banning history. People co opt that. So CRT is talking about the lens, right? However, I do agree that in the case of Rwanda, talking about their history did cause them to heal, but we should talk about what it was in their history that they constantly want people to remember, okay? So here's the thing. Desmond Tutu, in his book, The Fourfold Path of Forgiveness, talks about 4 steps that we need in order to heal. Now, Desmond Tutu, he was the Archbishop. He unfortunately passed away, I believe, in early 2022. But Desmond Tutu was active in the fight against apartheid throughout the 1960s, all the way to the time apartheid was abolished in the 1990s, right? He was big on forgiveness, and in fact, he led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which involved a lot of confrontation of the hideous, dark things that happened during apartheid. I mean, the police force at that time was so brutal, so evil. Like, even when it comes to talking about police brutality, like, Desmond Tutu has seen it all and been through like the nastiest, I think, of the nastiest forms of racism that we might even never see again in our lifetimes, God willing, right? God forbid. So, Desmond Tutu, after all he has done in honestly, social justice movements to rid a nation of a highly oppressive racist system, wrote 2 books about forgiveness. And one of that is the Book of Forgiving, right? And in the Book of Forgiving, he has a 4-fold path to forgiveness, which is tell the truth, name the hurt, you can grant forgiveness, it is your option to, and then you can release or renew the relationship. So I think what Jackie is saying, in the fact that we have to name the hurt, we have to tell the truth and name the hurt, that I fully agree with and I fully think is absolutely necessary in this country. But when it comes to the Rwandan genocide, we have to talk about what they were talking about, what history led them to that genocide, right? What's crazy is, I'll say that, I guess I'll say it now, I wanted to leave it for the end, but even saying Hutu and Tutsi is not really a good thing. Like, we don't say that. But I will say, for the sake of this argument, I will make mention of that. I don't mean to offend anyone through the use of those terms, but I will just use it for the sake of understanding the history of what got people to that point. So the Belgians colonized Rwanda, and in that colonization, they added to the separation of these 2 groups. So there were distinctions, tribal distinctions, but see, they added benefits and they added a little bit more privilege, that's the word, privilege to Tutsis. And throughout the years, like over many, many years, there was a resentment that grew against the added privilege that the Tutsis had. So they actually had identification cards that they needed to present to say, I'm Tutsi, I'm this, that, I have access to go into these places. Very much like apartheid, very much like Nazi Germany. It wasn't good. It was a terrible system. But this distinction, this separation, and also this elevation of one group because of their looks, because they were slightly more, I guess, like Middle Eastern looking. This group was a bit more privileged in the eyes of the Belgians, and they made this so that there would be that tribal conflict, that inner group conflict, right? Long story short, and I mean a long story with much more detail, and I highly recommend anyone watching this to just look this up yourself, do the research yourself. The Hutus built a strong resentment against the Tutsis. This was socially, this was, through life, it was always Tutsis, they're taking this, they're taking that. And then there were little fires here and there were riots, there was just resentment building. And then there was a kind of rebel group that, would broadcast these radio talks, and they had this coordinated plan through the radio that they would sort of send out a call, like a whistle blow, right? And that will be the signal, once the tension had built up, that would be the signal for one group to go out and eliminate the other group, because they had taken all their resources, they were just privileged, they had got away with another type of genocide a few years ago, right? So they were kind of like, we have to get our revenge, we have to get our retribution. And so on that day, okay, once that radio call was given over the radio, people got machetes, they got whatever they could, and they killed, like they just went out and just started killing everyone. And that's how 800,000 people died in 100 days. And there were other deaths surrounding this, up to like 200,000 after that window, before that window. But all in all, it was 1 million people, 1 million lives that perished through this genocide. But I think it is important to talk about the lens in which they chose to see their fellow man, even family members. Guys, people got machetes and they killed their family members. It was terrifying, right? And the reason I want to talk about it is, like, yes, Rwandans did talk about this, and they do talk about this. This is what brought healing. But see, now when we take it to the American landscape, I think through that lens of understanding what happened in Rwanda, it's important to understand why people have this aggravation against allowing people to look at the world through this lens that critical social justice has given us, which is seeing another group as more privileged, seeing, if I'm a Black woman, I see myself as less privileged, there's a resentment that builds, right? And for me, I don't think we're going to go into the same type of genocide that we had, but I just think for everyday life, it makes things a little bit more chaotic. And what we want to bring back is order, peace, restoration. So in a way, by understanding what happened in Rwanda, it's actually quite a parallel to understand why people are speaking out against critical race theory and critical social justice, forms of anti-racism that say that present discrimination is justifiable to correct past discrimination. And I hope that makes a lot of sense. I hope it makes sense to you guys. If it doesn't, feel free to hit me up in the comments below. But so that's the reason why I think it's ironic that she said it is important to talk about the history. So if there is ever a time where people are like, the pushback on critical race theory is just hiding American history, it's more so, if we're going to parallel it with Rwanda, it is more so being careful about the distinctions we make based on immutable characteristics, bringing those back, enforcing that, saying, white privilege, there's nothing you can do. White people will always be privileged no matter what. Black people in the system will always be disparaged. It makes it such that what is the only solution left except to seek revenge? Again, this doesn't mean I'm saying that genocide will occur, but it does mean that in some way we allow certain atrocities, certain injustices, because we feel like collectively, as Black individuals, we do not have power. And I think, especially as believers, we have such power, authority given to us in the name of Jesus, that when we impose this lens on us, it negates the powerful, amazing things that God has already like destined us with. And I think that for me, for a time, I was under the weight of this lens as well. And I totally forgot about God's goodness until scriptures like Philippians 2:3, treat others better than yourselves, convicted me that I realized, you know what? I cannot hold this resentment against these different people um, because it is keeping me from obeying the word and having the fruit that comes with obeying the word, which are the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, and so many other things, right? So, anyway, um, so when it comes to Desmond Tutu's fourfold path of forgiveness, I definitely think we should name the hurt. And coming back to what I agree with what Jackie said, name the hurt, tell the truth, right? But just remember also what it was that brought people in Rwanda to that point. If we're going to tell the history, let's remember that and bring that history to the American landscape and really see with a critical eye what we are doing right now in the type of literature and the type of ideology we're passing on to the next generation, even just to us, but most especially to the next generation, right? Um, but also, when it comes to naming the hurt and telling the truth in our day to day lives, when talking about Desmond Tutu's fourfold path of forgiveness, I think, going back to what I agree with, I think it's also important to have these conversations. If we do want to talk about American history, we want to bring it forth. We want to, we want to talk about the pains that we've experienced, pains through racism. I think it's important to talk about these interpersonally, like literally talk to the people who you actually feel like have hurt you. Talk to the people with whom you remember, like, there was this instance, there was this incident. I feel like there was some sort of wrong that was done, and I do feel like racism was behind that motivation. It might be hard, but I think we need to have those discussions rather than just laying out blanket statements and never getting to the heart of the issue. So I think, yes, let's tell the truth, let's name the hurt, and let's even go a step further. Instead of making it a group thing without lumping characteristics onto people with certain immutable characteristics, let's actually go where the pain stemmed from. Let's think back to where that sting of a microaggression occurred, whether it's journaling it down, whether it's confronting the person, whether it's being like, hey, this is what happened, this is the hurt I feel. I think as Americans, it's important to take that interpersonal step and begin that journey with people that we know. But instead of leaving it at telling the truth and naming the hurt, let's also go a step further to give the option of granting forgiveness. Okay, so we can grant forgiveness. And that doesn't mean you let these people back into your life. It doesn't mean everything's all good, because the fourth step is renewing or releasing the relationship. If someone, especially in my opinion and what I've seen in my personal life, if someone is not repentant, if someone does not see the wrong that they have done, if someone is still bent on acting in ways and patterns that hurt you, hurt other people, this is not even just dealing with racism, anything across the board, then you can just release that relationship. But that doesn't stop you from granting forgiveness, which I think does more healing for you as a person who has been hurt than for the other person. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that, but let's also talk about, I want to wrap this up. Thank you for hanging out to the end. I know this is kind of a longer video than I put out, than the videos I usually put out, but let's talk about what caused Rwanda to heal from that atrocious history, which only occurred in 1994. This was like yesterday. I know it's almost been 30 years now, but like, if you think about the progress that has occurred, what are the things that they have done in order to heal? And I think if we're talking about history, we also need to talk about what they did and how we can also implement some of the things that they did into our American landscape. Once we start talking about the history, once we start being comfortable with addressing issues where we feel like racism has occurred, confronting that, and even opening our hearts up to forgiveness, then what is the next step moving forward? Well, the Rwandan people, the reason we do not say Rwandese anymore is, first of all, they removed the classifications of the Belgians. And even the saying Rwandan is a more English way of saying, referring to the Rwandan people, because Rwandese is, from what I understand from my mother, this might be wrong if someone knows this more accurately, but Rwandese is the French way of saying it, which again brings back the remembrance of the Belgian oppression, right? Um, Another very important thing, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is that they no longer refer to themselves as Hutu and Tutsi. So for anyone going to Rwanda, please know that you don't want to just go up to someone and ask, like, are you Tutsi? Are you Hutu? Like, that's really, really disrespectful. But it's important to note that they removed the classifications that brought that separation, that brought that segregation, okay? In our American landscape, a lot of people strongly identify with their racial classifications. That the idea of saying, why don't we become deracialized, is almost like saying you're taking away my identity. I was on a debate against this, and I initially was against deracialization until I read more into the works of Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, that I realized this is actually what they were striving for, right? So I think we need to consider the healing that took place in Rwanda, consider the fact that they were strong on the deracialization factor, and maybe consider that perhaps that is what we need in our American landscape. We need to lose the label of white. We need to lose the label of black. And I mean this like as for the individual, not just collectively, but like saying, I am black or I am white, and lumping all of the things that are ascribed to the stereotypes of either, right? We need to lose those classifications. Why? Because they come from the oppressive force. Just like with Rwanda and the Belgians, that distinction was just stamped on and pressed in from the oppressive colonizers. And when we think about the distinctions of race in this country, it really does stem from the oppression of white supremacy. Like, the distinctions of someone is black in contrast to the fact that there are white individuals. And shout out to Dr. Sheila Mason, who has a book on this, the theory of racelessness. That is her company. That is her. She also has a book based on that theory. So she is the founder and president of that. I highly, highly suggest that you look into that. But Deracialization is also an amazing book by Thomas Shackleton Williams called Self-Portrait in Black and White, where he talks about his reasoning and what brought him to the realization that we might need to consider deracialization as a way of moving forward. I think it's something that our American landscape needs to consider. The only thing is that there is a huge industry called DEI that depends on those classifications staying in place. Like, if we lose that, a whole industry will collapse. And I think we have to look at the fact that money is motivating a lot of people to keep certain tensions alive. Otherwise, they don't need to come into your workplace. They don't need to come into your college campus and, get funding and get resources and create jobs in that way. So I think that's a little bit sinister. As believers, we really have to use discernment with these things. Anyway, so that was the final thought that I wanted to bring it to. What did cause healing for the Rwandan people? It was removing those labels, removing that separation. And I highly recommend people check out Rwanda if you ever are able to visit. I had the opportunity to live there for a while, almost like accumulatively about over a year. And it was an incredible experience. I will say it's very different from Uganda, very different from anything you will experience in America, but it is an incredible experience nonetheless. There's just such a unity in the people, a resolve to never go back to what they came out of, and it inspires me a lot every day, even to make these videos as I do. So anyway, I hope you found that helpful. I hope you found that eye-opening. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If there's anything that I missed, you're welcome to also add to that in the comments below. If Jackie Tim, you happen to watch this, made it through to the end. I thank you for that. I hope this was helpful. I hope that the root of love that it came out of is present and evident. And I'm not trying to be critical, because that podcast did really bless me so much. So I highly recommend anyone else who is interested in checking that out, do check it out. I'll link it in the description below. Like this video if you found it helpful, and I will catch you guys later. Thank you so much, and bye for now.